Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Welcome back to the Cabral Concept. Great to have you here as always. We are getting started today with our Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday, and the topic is all about intestinal permeability, leaky gut, and this is something that obviously many people are talking about right now, and I say finally because this has been going on, well, since I guess humans have been alive, but really even conventional medicine has woken up to the fact that a lot of autoimmune issues, a lot of allergies, a lot of chronic pain and inflammation in the body, which by the way is implicated in over 90% of all disease. And again, I'm trying to find the 10% that is not implicated in. But when you look at this, you have to understand is one of the most important things of our overall health is our gut function. That's how we digest our food. That's how we break down our food. That's how we absorb our food. And if you listen to yesterday's show, you would see that there are 4 main ways that our gut basically begins to break down. And you can check out episode 1754, yesterday's show. All of today's show notes will be on episode 1755 today. So you can go to stephencabral.com/1755 for the direct show. And then of course, all previous shows are at stephencabral.com/podcast. That's it. stephencabral.com/podcast. I want to get right into though, with just a short intro about what leaky gut and intestinal permeability is if you've never heard about it before, because it is so important. So when we look at our digestive tract, if you're watching this on video, you can see me basically. You have my mouth, and then you have an esophagus. The esophagus is somewhere from a foot long to 18 inches long or so. And then it ends up in my stomach. And my stomach is basically right in the middle, right below my rib cage right here. This is the xiphoid process. If you've ever taken a CPR-based class, you know there's a little bone right here that you're looking to put your thumb and your fist right into as you do that Heimlich maneuver. Well, that's basically where our stomach is. And I point that out because it's very important. Because when we get bloating and all sorts of digestive issues, and inflammation, we oftentimes think it's our stomach that's bloated, but it's usually not. When you get all that bloating around your belly button and below, that's your small intestine for the most part. So think about this. When your stomach gets full, it's only about the size of your fist. I mean, inflated, it can be a little bit bigger than that for sure. But when we look at that, we're looking at the stomach then moving into a small intestine, right? So the first part of the small intestine, the stomach is basically like a holding balloon, like a pouch, and it fills up. And when it fills up, once the food starts to get broken down, well, about a teaspoon or so every couple minutes moves into the duodenum, which is that first part of the small intestine. That's about 10 inches or so long. Again, give or take the size of the adult, the human being. And then it moves into the rest of the small intestine. We won't go through all of that today. But you should know that your small intestine has 3 parts, and all of that is meant to have this nice lactobacillus-based bacteria that helps to break things down properly, works with absorption. All of that's great. And then after that, the small intestine is about 21 to 23 feet. It flows from the cecum, which is the last part of that small intestine, into the it flows from, the ileum into the cecum. And so that's the first part of the large intestine or colon. And the colon's about 5 or 6 feet long. So not as large, right? It's called the large intestine because it's thicker. It's larger. Literally, it has a greater diameter. And the small intestine, 21 to 23 feet. The large intestine, 5 to 6 feet or so. And then all of that bowel movement, that waste, which is about 90% or so bacteria, comes out of the body. Well, there's a lot that goes on in that 25 feet or so, 28 feet of digestive tract. So we're looking at the body breaking down the nutrients properly. And then if all of that goes well, those little tiny particles of sugar from carbohydrates, amino acids from protein, and fatty acids from fat go through the cell wall. They literally permeate, they move through the luminal wall, the lamina propria, the outside epithelial wall of the intestines, it's called, right? A lot of different names for it. But it moves through these tiny little junctions, these tiny gaps that are only and should only be large enough to allow these tiny molecules, usually a lot of times single polysaccharides and amino acids, et cetera, to get into the bloodstream. And so that's how things should work. However, under inflammatory-based conditions, sometimes it's alcohol, sometimes it's birth control, sometimes it's antibiotics, sometimes it's the chlorine in the tap water, sometimes it's the pesticides in the food that we're eating. All of those things can cause inflammation and then cause gut permeability. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that those little tight junctions, as they're called, inside the cell wall, they become just a little bit bigger. Not huge, but a little bit bigger. Well, how does that happen? Well, what happens is you have these little villi. So again, if you're watching this on video, they literally look like a shag carpet. They look like tiny little fingers. And on top of those tiny little fingers, you have other little tiny fingers. And those are the microvilli, or the enterocytes. This is what allows us to literally break down nutrients, make serotonin, make vitamin B12, all of these great nutrients that our body needs. But in too much inflammation, it breaks those down. It blunts them. That's the process we call it. It creates crypts. It creates literally gaps where we don't have those villi in our small intestine or in large intestine as well. So now what happens is those gaps become larger. Because of the inflammation, the gaps widen. Now, when the gaps widen, what happens here? Well, now we have bacteria. We have larger saturated fats attached to bacteria moving through, like lipopolysaccharides. We have larger strands of amino acids as proteins moving in the bloodstream. Well, what does the bloodstream then do? Well, the bloodstream then, about 80% of our immune system is located in and around this intestinal wall. And so we say, well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to create more white blood cells. And those white blood cells are going to do what? Well, they're going to go after these foreign bodies that should never have escaped from the small intestine and large intestine as well. So what happens? Well, the white blood cells then go after these food antigens or bacteria or anything that's seeping into the bloodstream. And what happens? Well, we get inflammation. And inflammation can then lead to what? Well, whatever you are genetically predisposed to. So that's why we have to take the whole genetic thing out of the equation. Yes, your genetics matter. My genetics lead to poor blood sugar stabilization. My genetics lead to rheumatoid arthritis. My genetics lead to all sorts of these other issues, right? Your genetics might lead to Hashimoto's. It might lead to MS. It might lead to, lupus. But that's your genetics. But why did it happen? Well, it could be from intestinal permeability. It could be from the inflammation caused by the over-exaggeration of the immune system. Has the immune system messed up? No, not at all. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Now, maybe it's over-exaggerated, sure, but that's because you have bacteria or proteins spilling out of what was supposed to be the outside of your body. It's this tube that runs from the outside, your mouth, through your body to your anus. And if you are allowing the things that should never have escaped that tube to come out into your bloodstream, then your immune system has to react. It has to. That's its job. It's not messing up. So when someone says, oh, well, your immune system messed up, no. Your immune system doing what it should be doing. Yes, it's over-exaggerated, but there's always a reason why. And if you haven't asked the reason why, if your doctor hasn't asked the reason why, your specialist hasn't, you don't need to give them up as a physician. What you need to do, though, is just find someone who specializes in that, and the two can work in harmony, right? Everybody can have a naturopathic doctor or an integrative health practitioner, and they can also have a medical doctor. Like, you're not saying one's better than the other. They should just do what they do, right? They should specialize in what they specialize in. And the end goal, I've always said this, is like, why is there so much ego in medicine when the end goal is to help the person in front of you, help the patient as best you can, help the wellness client, right? Natural health. So again, that just kind of off on a little bit of a rant there, but that's the truth. So now what I want to share with you, though, is because we've talked about the alcohol, we talked about the pharmaceuticals, the birth control, the tap water, the heavy metals, the poor food combining, etc. But you may not have known, because it's not talked about as much, but stress alone can cause intestinal permeability. Stress, trauma, pain alone can cause intestinal permeability. So you might be eating a phenomenal diet, and you can't figure out why your candida metabolic and vitamins test or your bacteria and parasite stool test come back as, oh, it's still not fixed, it's still not right. Well, high levels of stress can create intestinal permeability. And here's why. And the research is pretty fantastic. It honestly is. And I'm going to be able to give you something that's going to help with this. But this is what the research showed us, is that high levels of stress aggravate mast cells in the body. Now you might say, well, what's mast cells? Well, I learned about this at a younger age. And the reason is that I am genetically prone to mastocytosis, which is an over-exaggeration of mast cells in my body. And that's because my body doesn't do a great job at breaking down these mast cells so they don't keep accumulating, right? And what's the issue with mast cells? Well, they produce histamines. You might say, oh, I think I've heard about histamines before. I've got many shows on histamines. So please go to stevencabral.com/podcast. They're all free. You can literally just type in histamine and you can see all the different shows on histamines, high histamine foods, etc. But histamines can lead to migraines. I used to have histamine-based headaches or mast cell activated headaches like literally every afternoon during childhood. I had so many issues with debilitating seasonal allergies. A lot of people suffering from asthma. You have to understand is that a lot of these things, this inflammation, is caused by mast cells, and what they do is they degranulate. I've had the pleasure of actually being able to look at these under an electron microscope, and you can actually see all of the cytokines, the ability to basically break down, to become unstabilized under stress, and then all these histamines move out into your bloodstream. And they could lead to the itchy eyes, they could lead to the headaches, they could lead to the brain fog, they can lead to the skin rashes, they can lead to the bloating. And now we know through medical science, and that's why I love modern day state-of-the-art medical science, and I'd love to be able to blend that as well with the ancient Ayurvedic wisdom and a lot of these other forms of traditional naturopathy. But when we look at it, we can see clearly that our intestines have many, many mast cells inside and around that wall. So what happens when we're stressed? The mast cells inside the intestinal wall become destabilized. That means they then begin to produce more, or I should say release. They release more histamines then into the body. That creates then inflammation in and around the digestive tract, which then creates leaky gut, aka intestinal permeability, which means a widening of those gaps, which then leads to what? More inflammation, because now you're spilling out proteins. Now you're spilling out bacteria and everything else that might be inside your gut wall that was never meant to be in your bloodstream. Can you start to see how stress can affect the gut, which can affect inflammation, which can then overflow the rain barrel? And when you overflow your personal rain barrel, it then allows your genetics, whatever's in that genetic code, to then manifest. But if we know how it happened, and you don't need to be stress-free, right? We need to work on that lifestyle-wise, there's no doubt about it. But if we know how it happened, we can reverse that process. So if we know how it happened, we're able to then work on the stress, work on sealing up the gut wall, work on decreasing the histamine-based response by controlling mast cells to a greater degree. What is one way that we've learned that we're able to do that? Well, I want to cite one piece of research that to me, I said, oh, this is a game changer. They did a study on mice, lab rats, and they actually bred these lab rats to not be able to have unstable mast cells inside the intestinal wall. Then they exposed to the same level of stress that they would a rat with the ability to have destabilized mast cells. And when that same stress was applied, there was no leaky gut or intestinal permeability in the lab rats bred to have this stable mast cells in the gut wall. And I was like, well, this is really interesting because we already know this happens in humans. And now we can see in mouse-based studies, rat-based studies, whatever you want to call it, that this doesn't happen. So, well, how do we better stabilize mast cells? Well, believe it or not, and we've been talking about this so much recently, it goes back to a lot of the same things that can help our immune system. Some of it's vitamin C, some of it's zinc, no doubt about it. There's some magnesium, vitamin D in there, but there's one big nutrient that seems to be a game changer for people that are not able to keep that gut wall closed because of stress. And that is the super nutrient, the phytonutrient quercetin. Now, one of the interesting things about quercetin is there has been so much research lately on quercetin showing, and I'll link some of these up today. So just go to stephencabral.com/1755. So we've got research on quercetin as a bioflavonoid, helping with potentially cancer growth in the colon, with potentially breast cancer, potentially prostate, ovarian, endometrial, and lung-based forms. Again, not a cure for, but potentially helping with. We also look at it as helping with a neurocognitive function. Again, more symptoms of allergies like runny nose, watery eyes, hives, all of those things very, very important. And also helping with that gut barrier as well. So it goes more into brain benefits with anti-inflammatory forms of the brain, with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. More of that research needs to be done. But here's the interesting thing, is that we know that we can get it from certain foods, and I talk about that, so I'm going to link you back up with episode 1733 for the higher quercetin-based foods. So you can just go to stephencabral.com/1733 or after the show, or just head on over to today's show notes at 1755. I'll link up everything in there. Our team's usually really great about that, but let's look at it this way. The average human is getting about, let's say, 100 milligrams to maybe 200 milligrams of quercetin today. Except, and this is extremely important, there are so many people right now on a low carbohydrate diet, if they're doing keto or carnivore, that they're missing out on the benefits of quercetin. Because the majority of the quercetin that we're looking at really comes from fruit and specific veggies. So for example, in a higher quercetin-based fruit, let's just say an apple as an example, or cranberries. Most people can eat an apple for the most part. That's an easy one, right? We're getting maybe 100 milligrams or so, right? Somewhere around there. Fantastic, right? Okay, so that's a little bit of quercetin. I try to get my apple a day. But also, let's look at the most potent quercetin food out there. And it's probably an onion, right? Specific types of onions. So that might be 200, 300, maybe a little bit more onions, but that's a whole onion. Nobody's eating, well, some people are, I'm sure, but who's eating a whole onion a day? So what I'm saying is we need the benefits of quercetin, and we should get them through a whole food diet. Whole food always comes first. And there's very limited quercetin in your red wine, so you can't really use that as an excuse. Very little in tea. There's some, for sure. But what I recommend is for maintenance, you get it through a whole food diet. And there's no doubt about that. But there's a few ways to look at this. Let's say you are someone that wants to be on a low carb diet for whatever reason, and you have gut permeability based issues. You may want to supplement. A lot of people are going to want to supplement anyways for about 12 to 16 weeks, just to really start to rebalance that gut microbiome and the mast cells there. And then what happens is once your gut gets healthy, remember, there's always an underlying root cause. So look at the candida overgrowth. I talk about it a lot on yesterday's show. Look at the bacterial overgrowth. Look at the H. pylori. Look at the low stomach acid. Look at the parasites, okay? Because when your gut's healthy, you start to produce your own enzymes called diamine oxidase. And diamine oxidase, DAO, actually helps you break down histamines in your bloodstream, right? So that's a great thing to obviously be able to do on your own. But how do we stabilize these mast cells to a greater degree? And what's been proven to work? That's quercetin, right? So my recommendation is, yes, get it from the whole food diet. But if you're someone that's also working on sealing your gut, you may want to get a couple 100 milligrams a day in quercetin extra, right? I'm typically saying 400 to 500 milligrams would be what I'd be looking for a good clinical dosage. So again, it's be difficult to get from food. You probably don't even want to eat a whole onion a day if you have bacterial overgrowth or you have candida. And the reason is that it's an amazing prebiotic, but that also is going to feed the bad bacteria that you don't necessarily want. So it's going to create some fermentation in the gut. And if you have sulfur-based issues right now, then you're not going to be able to break that down as well. So what I would say is this. If you can supplement with a good quality quercetin, 400 plus milligrams daily for even just 6 to 8 weeks, you might see tremendous benefit in all of the symptoms that I also spoke about as well. Again, on this podcast, I'm not providing diagnosis, I'm not providing cures, and I'm not providing treatment protocols. What I'm doing is sharing with you real science that is proven to work with natural health. So I'll just say what I would do myself. What I do, let's say for myself and my own family, would be use 400 to 800 milligrams daily on top of a good quality whole food diet. Okay. So And what I do myself is every single day, I take a product called Full Spectrum Vitamin C. That has 140 milligrams extra per day in looking at just quercetin alone. But what I do that for mainly is a good whole food version as well of the vitamin C. So I'm getting the orthomolecular version, but I'm also getting my whole foods such as acerola berry and from quercetin, etc. So I'm going to look up the daily nutritional support as well to see if we put quercetin in that. I know it's going to be in our anti-aging baseline because quercetin really can be a game changer in terms of anti-aging, but I'm not sure that we put it in here specifically. And it would be surprising if we did because it's not specific. No. Okay. So there's another product that I would use though, and that is called Hist Pro. Hist Pro is a top-of-the-line product for helping with histamine. So when we look at this, again, not a treatment protocol, not cures, but it has 400 milligrams in just 2 capsules. And it's also giving you a lot of the synergists that I won't go into right now because my job is to provide you the education. If you feel it's the right product for you, then fantastic. Okay, then that's the right product for you. But I look at it like this. You could take 2 capsules with each meal and get 1,200 milligrams really easily of quercetin per day. And it could be a game changer for many people dealing with mast cell and histamine-based issues. Plus, it provides a lot of those cofactors. You might even just start with 2 capsules per day, really easy with a meal, and that's 400 milligrams. It's enough to get a clinical benefit, and of course, you can take the full spectrum vitamin C if you wanted to. Both of these are available at Equa Life, which is just equa.life is the website, EQUI.LIFE, or if you work with a qualified functional medicine practitioner, if you work with an integrative health practitioner, if you work with a naturopathic doctor, they may have their own functional medicine brand that they want to recommend to you. And that's great as well. As long as it's a good quality product, listen to your coach, listen to your doctor, and they're going to help you with this process. My job is to let you know that there are alternatives out there, that there actually are ways to work on the short-term symptoms while also helping the long-term root causes. So hopefully this show has been helpful. Again, I really recommend, quercetin is a game changer in terms of zinc ionophores, in terms of helping with different wellness and immunity-based things. You can check out that podcast. I'll link that up on today's podcast as well, but that was episode 1733. So much in the natural health world. I do hope that you're tuning in on a daily basis. And of course, if this podcast was helpful, please do feel free to share it with anyone you believe it could serve. Take care, everybody. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.